pretty cool. So Steve, you want to go and take over?
Yep.
Yeah,
I will
go.
take over.
I'll mute myself and go.
Welcome everybody. If you can mute yourselves now, and we will get going with the program. Welcome back to all of you regulars, and welcome for the first time to anybody who's just joining us. This is the Wednesday Web Jam. As Arna said, it's the 16th one we've done. Today, our agenda, we're just going to tell you how we're going to work. We want you all to stay on mute. We are going to use breakout rooms in Zoom later in the session. You can use the chat function to ask questions during the presentation. When you're in breakout rooms, you're going to be working with a small group of people, just 3 people, and then we're going to bring you all back. We do have a half hour after the close of the hour. We keep the session open for a half hour for questions and discussions. And both our presenters, Marc and Sarah, have agreed to stay on and answer questions then. So please stay on. We welcome you too, but the formal presentation will end at the top of the hour. I'm going to introduce the guest speakers in a moment. They're going to do a presentation. We're going to go to breakout rooms, and then there is some homework because this is the first part of 2 sessions. There will be a second session with Marc and Sarah next week, and we hope you will join us for that. And then obviously there's the next web jam, and we'll go to the decompression zone after that. So today we have Marc O'Brien, who is located in California, and Sarah Harrison. They're both partners in a purpose-driven creative studio, The Determined, and they're going to take us through an in-depth reflection and discussion about what our purpose is as designers, and try to push each of us to reflect on how we can bring our own purpose to our work. And from there, I'm going to hand it over to Marc and Sarah. Welcome, guys, and thank you for taking time to be with us.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Good morning. It's 8 a.m. my time here in LA. I am going to start sharing my screen now.
Okay, let me stop the share for me. There you go.
Okay. All right. So, yeah. All right. Well, yeah, thanks again for inviting us to take part, everyone over at the Design Thinkers group, and thanks for all of you for showing up. So we're excited to talk about the idea of bringing your purpose into the work that you do. Before we dive in, today we're going to be finding our purpose. After our presentation, we're going to go into some activities. We're going to go into some breakout rooms to help you really come up with a passion or passions that you care about. And then next week, we're going to get more practical. We're going to actually turn these passions into something that you can actually implement in your workplace. So Sarah and I run a creative studio called The Determined. We've been around for, I think it's 4 years now, Sarah. It's July, right?
Time is a flat circle.
Happy anniversary, I guess. Yeah, what is time? Yeah, so basically we are a creative studio for a climate resilient world. We work with organizations tackling our climate crisis. We do everything from branding to messaging to marketing, a lot of innovation strategy work, really fun stuff. Nonprofits to foundations to accelerators to climate startups. So in a nutshell, we make their work look good, sound awesome, be seen, and get the support that it needs. We use a lot of different methodologies in our work. You know, of course, design thinking is one of them. We feel like we have a suite of other methodologies that we can bring into the creative process. So in a sense, we've kind of hacked the design thinking process. I have been working with John Bielenberg, who's actually been a part of the Design Thinkers group in the past. He's a good friend of ours, a mentor of mine. I've been working with him for a good while. That's where I learned the think wrong process. So the think wrong process is really great for the first half of the design thinking phases. And then Sarah, she worked with Tom Chi, who co-founded Google X many years ago, and she studied under him when he left Google X and learned his prototype thinking, which is really emphasizing the prototyping and testing part. So we have a variety of processes we bring to our work with our clients. It's really fun stuff. An initiative that we actually started, not with a client, but through the Determine actually, is an initiative called Climate Designers. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it in a minute, but in a nutshell, it's a hub for designers and creative professionals from any sort of design industry who are committed to using their creative skills for climate action. Because our work is focused on climate, and as designers ourselves, we started to ask ourselves, wait a minute, we can't be the only designers interested in climate. There has to be other people out there. And sure enough, we put a landing page together in October and an email sign up as a prototype, basically, to see if this idea was sticky or not. And sure enough, we had hundreds of subscribers within the first month, and we knew Sarah and I were onto something. So yeah, so a little bit about us in relation to bringing purpose into our work. So before the Determined, I was not known as the climate designer guy. I was actually known as the social good designer guy. All of my work has been centered around social impact, social innovation, and then working with a variety of clients in a variety of industries: education, food, health, transportation, civic engagement. I knew I wanted to continue to pursue this work. I felt like design has the ability, has the power to do good in the world. And at the same time, I was also starting to teach. So I've been teaching part-time at a design school since, I think, 2013. And so every year I'm surrounding myself with young design students who love the craft of design, but they're looking for their purpose, right? And so because me being in the social impact space, I was exposing them to work on this kind of stuff, because communities and nonprofits and civic projects, they need designers. They need people like us to help translate complex issues and problems and things like that. And then around 2015 or so, I had my climate epiphany. I just woke up one day and felt the desire to kind of level up my career. I wanted to tackle bigger problems. And at the time I was independent. I've always been independent. And I knew I wanted to kind of level up my career. And so that's when Sarah and I met, and that's when we started the studio. And again, at the same time, in 2015 or so, I was reading a lot more about our climate crisis, watching the news, and getting a sense that there was something that I wanted to do beyond what I was currently doing to address our climate crisis. And then the Determine happened, and here we are. And then the third slide with my personal story is showing you all some sort of example, like actual real world example. And this is actually, I don't know if any of you have heard the First Things First manifesto. It was originally created back in 1964 by a UK designer, and it's had 2 iterations since. So me and some friends rewrote it for the 4th iteration, First Things First 2020. And we wrote this manifesto declaring this need for designers to tackle climate change. Every themed manifesto, the second one was written in 2000, the third one was written in 2014, had somewhat of a theme to it. And this theme was centered around climate change. And so, and it was actually written through the lens of, hey, young designers out there, you're going to adopt this crisis. You can use your creative talents to address it, and here's how. And so if you want to check out what we wrote up, go to firstthingsfirst2020.org. Currently, we have over 700, close to 800 actually, signatures right now. We launched the manifesto, I think, back in early May. And so it's an example. First Things First 2020 is an example of me and Sarah. Sarah was a part of this, obviously. But it was an example of how we wanted to create something to kind of a rally cry, if you will, or a flag in the ground in the design industry for people to wake up and realize, designers specifically, to wake up and realize, hey guys, we can take charge and actually address our climate crisis with our unique skills. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of background about me. I'm Sarah Harrison. My background is in UX design. I started actually as a graphic designer, was always interested in web design, and then transitioned into software design from there. and moved to San Francisco and started working in the startup scene. I was also, in addition to doing, what we typically think of as a designer is, pushing pixels around on a screen and making things look nice. I was also using my design skills to help the teams I was working with design systems that make them more efficient. If anyone has worked for tech startups, you know that they demand a lot out of you. It's just all consuming work. And I was working 60+ hour weeks. I'm someone that requires a lot of sleep. So while some people were working 80-hour weeks, 60 was a lot for me. Next slide. So around, probably 2013, I think, two things happened at the same time that that I would call my climate epiphany. So one was, working those 60+hour weeks for this startup and all of the stuff that I was responsible for, all of the leadership and management and responsibility that I had taken on, led to a lot of stress, which led to burnout, and I was in chronic pain all of the time. So I just felt like I was destroying my body. And at the same time, the outside world just kind of started feeling like it was falling apart. Around 2013, I believe the IPCC started putting out reports that helped me understand that climate change that I heard about in my third grade textbooks, I thought science had it covered. Nope, the IPCC, the UN, even the National Guard was getting ready to prepare for the effects of climate change and people being displaced from climate disasters in different areas. So I was like, goodness gracious, if the military is starting to spend resources on it, this is actually a thing. And the realization that I had at the time, because I was in consumer software, I was actually helping teams build websites that helped people, consumers, buy products that they were then going to throw away in 6 months. And I realized just in my systemic brain that, oh, cool, you can draw on this thing? Did I do that? I realized that consumerism was destroying the planet, and the work that I was doing was directly contributing to that. And so I think because those two things were happening at the same time with my big world climate epiphany and my body falling apart, I was like, why am I destroying my health for something that is destroying the planet? That was ultimately my realization. So I quit my job, started looking for something that I could do with my design skills that, rather than contributing to the problem, would contribute to the solution, which was a difficult and long and sometimes not very rewarding financially journey. But go ahead and advance to the next slide. So fast forward to, what was it, like summer last year, fall last year, Marc and I decided to launch this climatedesigners.org, which is a hub for designers and creative professionals from all industries. We've got illustrators, graphic designers, industrial product designers, software designers, packaging designers, architects, filmmakers, all industries committed to using their creative skills for climate action. So we've been growing that over the last few months. If you go to climatedesigners.org and hit join us, I want to direct your attention especially to the online community, which is kind of like a LinkedIn group or a Facebook group, but it has a couple of other features. We've grown that to over 400 plus global members, and we're doing a lot of teaching and educating, and we have big goals. We want to be kind of like the AIGA for climate focused designers. So that's my story. And I'd love it if you joined and help us out with that if you're interested in climate things. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So next up, I want to hear from all of you. We're going to do a couple of quick polls. We're going to ask who's in the room, what you're working on, a little bit like that. So yeah, let's go ahead and start the first poll. This one should be, yeah. What's your I guess, job title, or how would you categorize the work that you're doing? Give you a few more seconds to answer that cute little pop-up. That just helps us know who's in the room. Hey, I have a chat message that says, can't see your slides, just you. So not sure if the spotlight video is taking over the slides, but we like to have multiple visuals to help people take in information. All right, Jen can see slides. I don't know. It might be a Zoom setting. That's a good idea. Okay. Has everyone had a chance to answer the poll? Looks pretty good. See a lot of service designer, human-centered designer, consultant, freelancer. Awesome. A few educators. Marc and I are educators as well. All right. Looks like 100% voted. So the next one is the next poll. I've got too many windows for me to remember the exact wording or read off the exact wording. Yes, okay. What industry do you most often work in is the next one. And there will be a poll with, yeah, with several options.
I'm trying to find it for you. I got
Yeah,
it.
and just an FYI for the Zoom UI, you'll see a little drop down that says poll number 2.
Ah,
Yep. It's up
Got
there.
it. Thanks.
great.
So yeah, are you in automotive? Are you in travel, agriculture, education, public sector?
Yeah, and if you don't think that your work falls into any of those industries very well, you can just go ahead and enter your industry in the chat that you most often work in. So if you are an other, you can go ahead and answer that in the chat. But we just want to get a good feel for the different interests and skills that are in the room. Cool.
Other sounds so negative. I like
If you're
others.
an other, that's why I have the pirate background, because I think being a nonconformist other is cool.
Don't get Sarah started about pirates.
Pirates are cool. Cool. You guys are multi-talented all over the map.
All right.
All right, looks good. Got a lot of technology, a lot of education. I'm seeing some entertainment, arts and culture, food, social and non-government organizations. Cool,
Yeah,
cool.
where are the others? Great, great.
All right, let's go on.
Cool.
So the reason that I am so excited about this session today, I don't know if many of you have seen this graph, but this was a really exciting, what would they call it? Like a design, okay, so yeah, that's right there, design value index. The design value index is a series of companies, a portfolio of companies that were created to track how well these design-centric companies performed. And creating this index allowed them to compare the performance of these companies that they considered design-centric, comparing them with the performance financially of, you know, the other companies that we use for performance measurement, like the S&P 500 and a couple of others. So these are companies like Apple, Herman Miller, IBM, Nike, Target, a lot of companies that come to mind when you think about, who is taking advantage of design, who's using design as one of their leading things. And so basically what ended up happening after tracking this for 10 years is they found that the design-centered companies outperformed the regular Fortune 500 companies by 211%. So design directly helps the bottom line. And after this came out, I was working as a consulting or designer for hire back in these days. And it was very visible to me that it went from me having to prove my worth as a designer to that being taken as a given. So at least in startups and more forward-thinking companies, they know that they need to have designers in order to perform well and in order to meet their goals. So designers are very important to companies. That's a really great place to be. So knowing that, and also going back to the things that, well, I'm not going to get ahead of myself. Let's stick to the script. So next slide. So knowing that, we know that design makes an impact. Okay, so that's where we start with this. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as what do we mean by design. We don't just mean like picking color palettes and picking the right fonts, which, a lot of stereotypical people think of as design. You guys are all design thinkers. You know that design is much more than that. So if we used the definition that IBM comes up with, which is design is the intent behind an outcome. I think that's pretty classic. Like design is the plan behind things. I want to even expand that even further. So next slide. This one comes from Antoinette Carroll, one of the founders of Creative Reaction Lab. She says that design is not just the intention behind an outcome, but also the unintentional impact behind an outcome. And as design thinkers, that's why you go through the prototype and test phase so that you can find out what the impacts and outcomes are of a design. And then you go back and redesign if the outcomes were not what you wanted. And so design is both the intention that you wanted to create as an outcome, and also finding out what the unintentional impacts and outcomes were so that you can go back and adjust that. So design is a very, very broad thing, very, very important to this discussion. Next slide. So knowing that design makes an impact, this is kind of where my big revelation came in. I was helping these teams be more efficient and helping these companies make more money, contributing to mass consumerism and the destruction of our planet. So as designers, which we know makes a huge impact, where do we want to make the biggest impact? We can help companies that are doing good. And that's where we're going with this.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So we're going to show you some examples. We pulled just 4 examples out of a ton of different real-world applications of people bringing purpose into their work. So the first example was actually a recent example. I don't know if any of you attended or heard of on the interwebs about this event called Where Are the Black Designers? And it was an initiative, and it's still continuing. Their big event was, I think, like 2 weeks ago. It's an initiative which aims to give a platform to creatives of color. By connecting designers, educators, and creative leaders, we hope to start a dialogue about change in and out of the design industry. Crazy fact, according to the AIGA Design Census of 2019, only 3% of designers are African American. And so this whole event, which was I think a 5-hour event all on Zoom that was put together in less than a month, which is pretty wild, covered a ton of different topics, including education, hiring, culture, allyship, to name a few. 10,000 people attended. And it was really the intent was to start a larger conversation within the design community saying, hey, y'all, like, Black, Indigenous, people of color, they're here. We're, they want to do creative work. Why are they not part of our industry? And so definitely check out the organization. They are doing a lot more events, virtual events, and a few other things moving forward. This is a relatively new project, I think within just like the last 2 weeks. So any of you that are interested in coding, definitely check this out. This is something called Climate Strike software, and it's a software license that you get through GitHub that developers can use to prohibit the use of their code by applications or companies that threaten to accelerate climate change through fossil fuel extraction. I don't know if you all heard about this or not, but big oil is investing a lot in cloud computing, IoT, and even AI to accelerate fossil fuel extraction. And so developers put together this software to, if you use this, you can't then use that same software for things like extracting fossil fuels. And I just wanted to pull out this is in their about page. I feel like this resonates, at least that the last part of this resonates with the topic that we're all here for today. We feel that as tech workers, we should take responsibility in how our software is used, and that the urgency of climate change cannot be limited by the ideological position of open source software. Instead, we want adopters of Climate Strike license to take a bold stance in the fight to save the planet. They're putting their fists on the table, right? They're putting the flag in the ground saying, you can't use our code, damn it. If you're doing this thing that's gonna fuck up the planet, you can't use this code. And so it's really cool to see that people are taking, and this isn't any one organization. These are just a group of people coming together to make a stand. And imagine the ripple effects within the coding industry that this kind of position, this flag in the ground is going to have. This is an organization that Sarah and I worked with at the start of the Determine, actually, called The Last Mile, an amazing organization, headquarters in the Bay Area, but they have they're serving a ton of other communities around the country. They actually are a nonprofit, and they prepare incarcerated individuals for successful reentry through business and technology training. And so they focus on education, vocation. They expand all throughout the country now in different correction facilities. They also do workforce reentry. And so they have volunteers from large companies like Google, the man you see wearing the Google Cloud shirt. They have volunteers from large tech companies coming in and teaching inmates coding and design. We actually, Sarah and I have a few friends who actually volunteered their design skills to teach basic design 101 foundational stuff to inmates, so that when they come out, they have a much better chance of getting jobs in tech. And I mean, you can see some of the stats on the slide. 90 returned citizens who are all full-time employed or in higher ed. And then they have a 0% recidivism rate, which is pretty phenomenal for those who went through the program. So if the Last Mile operates within your area, I highly encourage you to volunteer. They're always looking for people to come in and teach inmates throughout the country. And then the last example is, I'm sure you've seen the open letter to Jeff Bezos and the Amazon board. This came out last year, I believe, and it was signed by over 8,000, close to 9,000 Amazon employees, asking that the company adopts the climate plan shareholder resolution and release a company-wide climate plan that incorporates the principles outlined in this letter. And the screenshot you see is just a handful of the signatures, but a variety of people from lower management to middle management to upper management to basic employees. I have my 2 cents about Amazon. I will leave those out of the conversation, but it's interesting since then that, I don't know, this is relatively recent, and actually Sarah brought this to our attention, that Amazon is renaming the stadium in Seattle to Climate Pledge Stadium, and they're doing a lot of green initiatives within the stadium. And then personally, Jeff Bezos has pledged $10 billion towards climate change. There's a lot of back and forth within the climate industry about the impact, or kind of the perhaps lip service. So again, we won't get into that, but we wanted to include this example to show you all how employees within a company are stepping up and raising their voices. And unfortunately, some of the people that spearheaded this letter have been fired. So again, that's a whole other Zoom conversation. But it is good to know that company or employees within companies are stepping up. And so these are just 4 examples. There's a lot of other examples out there covering a lot of different topics, different passions that we're seeing kind of surfacing up, right? And I think we're living in an unprecedented time right now. And I think people are just tired and they want change. They want to see change, not on a personal level, but also at the professional level, because people spend the majority of their life with their coworkers, right? And so if they're gonna, like what Sarah was saying, if you're gonna stress yourself and work your ass off, you want to make sure that you're working for something that you believe in and that you have the shared values. So I'm gonna hand it back over to Sarah, and we're gonna get into the brainstorm session.
Yeah, so thanks for sitting tight through all of that. Hopefully some of those examples get the wheels spinning about creating an impact in your work. And so the first activity and this first session is going to be all around defining your passion, figuring out what you personally connect to. So we're going to do a couple of little like silent on our own brainstorming activities right now. So go ahead into the next slide. So we're going to show a whole bunch of social impact causes, things that we commonly see people dedicating their skills and time to. This is not an exhaustive list. There are definitely more things that you might be passionate about, but these are some really common ones that we've seen. So take a look at this list, and we've got, I think it was 5-6 minutes. We're just going to take some time and write down some of the issues that you care about. Yeah, 5 minutes. So let's go ahead and start the timer and just take some time silently, look over this list or look elsewhere and see if there are some causes that you think are interesting to you. Now, if you've already decided on one or you already have one, feel free to share that in the chat now if you like. Nice. Seeing transgender rights, disability and accessibility, diversity and inclusion, respect for the environment, differences in people, everyone's unique, mental health, healthcare, circular economy, all of them, diversity in women's rights, All of the above. I have a interest in all of the above too. For this exercise, we are going to sort of drill in. We're going to start narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. So those of you who, like me, care about all of these things, I guess for this talk and for our talk next week, we're going to ask you to pick one really specific.
And, keep in mind that you would be able to apply what you have learned this call and next week to all the other ones. So just kind of use the one as an example, knowing that you can apply it to other stuff.
Yeah. Police violence against African Americans.
And so much passion.
Neurodiversity. Yes. Capitalism. I know that's my latest passion too, is getting rid of capitalism. It fixes everything.
I'm gonna move on, since it seems like people are. So now go ahead and pick one or two. And so as we mentioned, just pick one or two and think about any of the experiences in your life related to those issues.
Yeah, so we're gonna take the next 5 minutes to pick one. And I think maybe one thing that will help is if you can pick something that in your life, a story, one specific story or experience that connects you with that issue. So for example, I could pick neurodiversity. I can't even say it, neurodiversity, where, we're all wired differently. And so I'm learning I probably have ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. And so that is a difference in the way my brain thinks. And so I didn't know about that. There was not a lot of awareness about it. And if I had known about it sooner, I probably would have gotten a lot of benefit from that. So I can think of specific examples in my life, stories or something that connect me with that issue. So that's what we're doing now, is thinking of your stories that connect you with one particular issue.
Sarah and Mark, I just want to flag the time that we're going to have less time in the breakout rooms, just because we're at a point where we want to start getting to breakout rooms. So
definitely. So yeah, this is the hard part, is picking one issue. I saw a lot of people that were kind of, I want to pick everything. So I want to see if
Steve,
you can narrow it down.
If you're running the breakout rooms, go ahead and kind of get that primed, and we can maybe trim some time now. So yeah, just when you enter, we're basically going to ask you all to share those stories that Sarah was asking you all about to one another in those breakout rooms. So while we're kind of gearing up to split everyone up, just think of those personal stories. And then, talk about those experiences that connect you with that passion. And then we're asking people to, take turns. It might be about 18 minutes or so. I think we're running a little bit low on time. So just regardless of how long it takes, we just make sure that all three of you all have an opportunity to share to your smaller group. So
yeah, and your small group might be able to help you narrow down your issues to something specific too.
So Steve, whenever you're ready.
Okay, I think Yen is going to send us into the breakouts.
Oh, okay.
You ready, Yen? Are we ready to go? You'll have about 3 people per room.
Yep.
Here we go. Just click the join breakout room button that pops up on your screen. There should be a join breakout room button. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Yeah, so I think we're good on time. A few minutes late, but all good. And Union, you mentioned something about the live YouTube recording, right?
Yeah. Steve will collect his group to come out into the general session. So we just give him a little bit of time.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to join mine then.
Yeah.
Now I can say hi.
Okay, looks like, yeah. Okay, I'm unmuted now. Razan and Ayanna, I'd like you guys to each take a turn sharing the passions that you like to work on or want to focus on in your design work. Which one of you would like to go first?
I can go first. Razan, you're a little hesitant.
Oh,
I put out there, they had voting education and voter turnout. And I changed that for me to voter suppression. And how that really resonates with me is because I don't think, because being a baby boomer and being raised by civil rights activists, voting rights always been a huge issue within my community. And so I can see myself doing work and educational work, both design and educational work around voter suppression. Razan left, we lost her.
yeah, I don't know what happened. Well, we can keep a lookout in the waiting room. Maybe she had a bad connection or something, but.
Okay.
I think that's a great issue. Ayanna, my wife was just listening to a podcast yesterday about how during George W. Bush's administration, even though he was trying to broaden the Republican coalition and do outreach to Hispanics and African Americans, the Republicans realized through their own polling data that they needed to restrict voting. Like, they do better when fewer people vote.
Right.
I mean, directly from their people, right? They know that the more people vote, the less well Republicans do, because they really don't have a policy platform that appeals to the majority of Americans. It's crazy. So and probably, I don't know what that's like over there in the Netherlands, Yen. It's surprising how few Americans voting who are eligible to vote get to vote.
Mm-hmm. What we have over here is that everybody can vote, being a Dutch citizen older than 18.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the way how the whole process is brought to everybody's mind. And it's easy to go vote. Right. So, for instance, I live in this house. I can choose 2-3 different spots walking distance.
Oh, wow.
To do the voting.
That's really great.
So up front, I will get an address. I can change the address. I can say, oh no, since I'm going to work, let me do the voting at the central station when I'm going to work. So it's made really, really easy to do so. You have your vote form and your something ID. It matches together, and that's it.
That's great. We don't have that.
We don't have that, and as Steve pointed out, and I think one of the also, obviously there's on the federal level. It's at one point, like I said, when I was growing up as a child, the federal government was actually a strong advocate for voters' rights. I guess I was under, Johnson. I grew up under Johnson and Kennedy. But the state governments are implementing really deliberate policies to restrict voters. And it's really interesting what's going on here. And so Union, when you talk about that, and how I normally vote is I get what's called an absentee ballot, because so I vote by mail, but I actually get it mailed to me and I fill it out because I like to do my research. I fill it out and I actually walk my ballot into the city hall I go to my city hall and I turn my ballot in person so I can get my I voted sticker, and I take a picture and I broadcast it, you know, just to let people know voting is critical in our country, you know.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have absentee and early voting in DC. So I actually can go, I often go during presidential election years, I usually go work as a volunteer to get out the vote in other states because DC is overwhelmingly liberal and, you know,
Right.
not as an issue here, but I go to Pennsylvania or somewhere to walk neighborhoods and say, for the Democratic Party, and say, please come vote. So I vote early, and I go like a couple weeks early to City Hall and cast my vote. And then, and a lot of people in DC do that. Yeah, it's amazing that we have, but I've read this thing about Atlanta and other places, especially in high minority districts, Yuyen, they will close polling you know, they'll have like thousands of people that need to vote. And, you know, 10 years ago, maybe they had 15 polling places in certain neighborhoods, and now that's like 3, you know, so it makes it really unpopular, hard to go stand in line for hours and hours, especially, you know, you got our election day is not a holiday. So that's another thing.
No, I think in our case, going to vote equals let's buy some bread today and go to the butcher as well. You know, it's really it's really easy to do so. Yeah. Steve, I saw that you had transgender rights as a topic in the chat. Can you tell me more about it?
Yes, I have 3 children, and oh, hello, Michael. And two of my children are transgender, which was shocking to me. You know, first identifying as kind of alternative or gay, and then later saying that they were transgender. So I have my oldest wants to be kind of neutral gender, asexual. And my youngest was a boy who is transitioning to a girl. And there's lots of medical, I mean, we've done all this sorts of counseling at the Children's Hospital here in DC, and it's been taxing. I mean, it's emotionally and mentally challenging, but then I'm seeing you know, what's out in society and the current administration trying to limit protections for transgender people. And, you know, it's interesting because here I am, you know, generally thought of as in a privileged majority. And now I'm coping with something that I did not grow up with, having to worry about, you know, being directly related to people or being discriminated against. And I mean, I think it's awareness raising. You know, I want what's best for my kids, and I want them to have the same opportunities I have. So, and there's even though there's a lot of acceptance of gay rights now, transgender is like a step further. And there's even a lot of gay people who don't accept transgender people. You know, they're like, okay, well, I get gay, but I don't get transgender. So there's this education and acceptance that has to go on. And I mean, we have people in our neighborhood who are my age, who, you know, one of my friends who's a fellow baseball coach with me went from being a 6'4" man to a 6'4" woman a couple of years ago. And his wife, her wife, stayed married to her, and her kids are all with her, and the whole community has been very supportive. We are lucky enough to live in this very liberal, accepting community. But I realize oftentimes as you go outside of the boundaries of a liberal urban area, that changes. So that's why I listed that. Looks like we've got somebody coming in from the waiting room.
Steve, thank you for that story. Yeah.
But I wanted to say just something about that, Steve. I have one of my former bosses, her husband also transgendered, and but not in terms of the full physical operations, any of that, but fully identifies more as a woman, took on a woman's name, dresses as a woman. And her wife is fully accepting of this. And I, again, though, I'm here in San Francisco Bay Area, So
Right.
that again is more of an open,
Sure.
accepting type of community.
It's very, I mean, mentally it's an adjustment for me. I mean, I have to keep reminding myself the right pronouns to use, and
Right.
my kids are good at reminding me, but I constantly call them he or she incorrectly, and you know, I'm trying to be supportive, but it's you know, we're not at the physical transformation stage yet. It's you know, more outward appearance. So that's interesting. And yeah.
I just go for the neutral gender. I go for the neutral pronoun.
Right. Well, that is something to default to, and it makes it easier. And I'm one of those snobby English major people who used to be, you know, oh, it's got to be. You can't call an individual they. But
Right.
I've overcome that, and I've read a lot about it. You know, there's nothing wrong with a third person plural pronoun to identify an individual. So
Right.
that took me a year. You know, I used to say dismissive things about that a couple of years ago. I no longer say that.
Kudos for you then. Kudos to you. I think that's wonderful. Good. Yeah.
Claudia, welcome. We see you came in. Oh, he can't hear you.
Unmute yourself. Yeah. Unmute yourself. Michael too.
Sorry, guys, I couldn't be later.
Okay, no worries, no worries. We're most people are in a breakout room, and they should be coming back. Actually, we should probably bring them back.
Not
How
yet.
much time did you give them, Yugen?
There is another 6 minutes for the third person starting now.
Okay, are you sending them reminders?
Yes,
Yeah,
I am.
She is. She is.
I was in a room talking to myself, which isn't very interesting.
Oh.
Nobody else was there.
Oh.
It's good company. You're entertaining, Michael.
Well, other people think so. I hold it near, it's not so funny.
So thank you guys for allowing me to join you. I'll try to catch up and bring my contribution. So I will.
Claudia,
I'll be in line.
we're sharing our individual passions. What kind of passions do we want to pursue through our work in design and consulting?
Perhaps Michael can start first.
Yeah.
Yes, please, Michael.
Mine is mental health being equivalent to physical health, and explicitly that. So if I give you an example, so I'm a runner. So if you go running, you always have a stretch and a warm down at the end, but nobody asks you how you're feeling, how was that? My family has a long history of mental illness that carries through the female line. All the males suffer from quite bad depression. It's not clinical, but it's quite bad. But it's still a shame-invoking thing to admit. So I'm telling you that I have a mental illness. I also happen to be gay, and I have more of a problem talking about my mental illness than I do about being gay. Because I think people don't quite know. It's such a big label. People don't know what it means. So I tend to move towards mental well-being rather than illness. So how well am I? How am I thinking? And I caught the end of the example of transgender. So I have a transgender friend. And for her, the issue is not being transgender. It's her mental health and her mental well-being.
Right.
And that she finds much more difficult to talk about because it's unseen and hidden.
Sure.
Whereas the gender she chooses to identify with is more obvious for her. She's 6'5", and has transitioned. But for me, the passion is that why is it not so I was talking to a client for the very first time last week, and he said, "Oh, how are you?" And I said, "Oh, not great." And he was really taken aback. He said, "Well, what do you mean?" And because what I'm trying to do with them is build trust, he said that was a really powerful intervention. But I didn't mean it to be a powerful intervention. It is legitimate not to say, "Hi, I'm fine," which the English say quite a lot, or "I'm okay," when actually the world underneath could be falling apart. So how do we make it part of our common language?
Sure. I like that, and being transparent and honest about how we're really doing.
No, how can I get help if people don't know how I am? And equally, how can I offer it if I don't know where people are?
Great. Aurea, are you, do you have something to share as far as a passion goes or a cause that you're committed to?
I'm passionate about creating, developing communities that develop together, co-creative communities. And in this respect, I try to focus on helping people to get together and engage in a pure sense and share the same purpose. I know that there is a lot of, the important thing I think is to build the spirit, to have the same energy and spirit, like we all share, I think, in this web jam Wednesday. I also, I'm looking for understanding the Internet of Humans. How can we connect and work together? And how can we overcome the fears and blockages we have? Even now, I'm a bit nervous, and I'm looking for my words, and the idea is to I don't know, to find the same purpose and share the same beliefs. I believe energy is a significant part of this equation, human energy. This is driven by joy or by negative things, and our objective is to try to feel good and do good.
Great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Aurea, where are you located?
I'm located in Bucharest, Romania.
Okay, okay, great.
We're back.
We came back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, back to you, Sarah and Marc. It looks like, I think, is everybody back? It looks like everybody's back, Yuyen, is that right?
Should be.
Almost.
I think so. They are traveling. Yeah.
32.
So,
Yep.
I think we'll have time in the backstage to share out some of the experiences that we discussed in the breakout room. So hang on to those. Next week, we are going to pick up where we left off here. Now that you've zeroed in, hopefully, on one or two specific passions, we'll cover some practical methods for what we do with that to turn those passions into our life's work. So we're going to give you a little bit of homework for the time in between, because a lot of people, I think, had, it's not enough time in these 5-minute sessions to really understand what your issue is if you just picked it, and to really understand how you personally connect to that issue. So in the time between now and next week's session, when we're going to pick this back up, we would love for you to do some research on your particular chosen issue, gather 3 current, or as current as you can, data points that are related to your chosen passions. So those could be news articles, blogs, organizations, specifically data points that can speak to specific numbers. You know, like how big of a problem is this? Where is this problem found? You know, some of the examples that we had before, like where are the Black designers? Marc mentioned 3% of designers identify as Black in the census. So that's a number, that's a specific measurement. We want to be able to measure our passion in real numbers. So if your passion is diversity and inclusion and getting more Black designers in the design industry, your number is 3%, and you'll be focused on taking that 3% and moving it upward. You know, if you have a passion for making sure that previously incarcerated individuals can pick their life back up and get into a career field that is beneficial, that metric is now, we know, is called recidivism. And this one organization was able to get that number to 0% of the people going through their system were seen going back into the prison system, which is a huge problem. Otherwise, once they were able to give them jobs and skills to get jobs, they didn't go back and turn to crime. Okay, next slide. So this idea of getting data points for your passion and measuring the real world outcomes. We just want to measure where they are today. This comes from Katie Patrick. She has a book called How to Save the World. So if you want to learn more about how to do this, it's really well detailed in her book. katiepatrick.com, I believe, and her book link is there. But if you can't narrow this down to one measurable metric, how many people are affected by this? How many pounds of trash are thrown into the ocean? How many tons of CO2 is in the air right now? If you can't narrow that down to a number, then we're just hoping for change and not really changing anything. We're just making a lot of noise. And so what we want you all to do is take the passion you're interested in, take your experience, take these data points, and figure out what that guiding metric is. And we'll pick this back up next week. And we, I think, are ready to transition into the backstage.
Mhm.
So yeah, so thanks for everyone joining. For those who have to jump off, appreciate your time and you showing up. And yeah, Sarah and I will be around for the next half hour or so to answer any questions.
Thank you, guys. That was really great. I just want to give a round of applause to you guys for doing that presentation. It's an important topic, and I'm really inspired, and I feel like empowered by the ideas that you brought to us, such as I don't know what you call it, the designer's clause about climate change, the issue about Black designers. I mean, those are all great examples. So for those of you who are sticking around for the backstage, we'd love to have you share out some of your passions. You shared them in your breakout rooms. If you'd like to share them on your chat, or also if you have questions for Sarah and Marc, please turn on your microphones and go ahead. If you can raise your hand using the reaction button at the bottom of your screen if you want, like that, or if you want to do something like that, and then we'll know to pick on you. So anybody want to start? And facilitators, help me look at the screen because I can't see everybody on my screen. I can see about 2/3. Well, hey, Mimp, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just.
Oh, can't hear you.
No, I'm just waving. Hi.
Oh, you're just waving. Okay.
Does anyone want to share their stories or revelations from their breakout rooms?
I have a question, and this is for both Sarah and for Marc. Out of the different passions that you listed, like, do you have any thoughts on, is there one or two passions that can have the most ripple effects towards other passions? Kind of like a keystone kind of passion?
Yeah, I think this came up in my breakout room. I don't know about everybody else, but it seems like people in the design thinkers group are big systemic thinkers, right? There's a lot of people who answered all of the above when we showed the passions list. So you're asking, you know, is there a way that we can affect as many issues at once, right? Or is there one that if we pull on that thread, it pulls them all? And I think someone in the chat earlier mentioned this as well, is, you know, all of these things are connected deeply. I think it was Juicy, which is a very wise thing to say. They are absolutely all connected. And I think that it's true that when you pull on one thread of any one of these, it tugs on the others. And that's why we asked you all to think of a personal experience that you can connect with personally, whether it's something that you've experienced personally with your own health or discrimination upon you or otherwise, or maybe you have a family member who's experienced something. Because if we all have personal experiences to draw from, that gives us the energy and the motivation to keep pushing for this change. And we all have different experiences. We all have different unique perspectives, and we have to come at it from, that's why it's about turning your passion into your life's work. We have to come at it from something that connects to us individually.
I think we have a point. Dana, do you want to, Dana Akins?
Sure. I was paired up with Jen, and we had a that was very interesting because I'm interested in diversity and inclusion that's one of, I had a lot of interest too, but that's the big one. And Jennifer, was it Sutherland? Where are you, Jennifer? Yeah, Sutherland. She lives in South Africa. And so this was kind of her interest was equality. Correct, Jen? You can jump in if you want. Yeah,
kind of basic human rights.
Basic. So it was a really, I mean, I'm so excited to have met her. There's a lot of crossover, and I hope to stay in contact, but I had so many stories. I told her I could tell her like 1,000 stories. And she, on the other hand, said she didn't really have a story. So I just thought that was really interesting. I was, I guess I was happy to hear that someone like her was interested in this subject, considering her, you know, not personally having a story. You understand what I'm saying? There is a level of empathy there. So that was really good. And so I'm not gonna, I mean, for example, just one of my stories when I was around 4 or 5 years old, I wanted to play with some neighborhood kids, and they said they're not allowed to play with me because I'm Black. That was the first time I learned about racism. So my mother sat me down. She read a book on Martin Luther King, and the same thing happened to him. But, you know, you know, I was like, what is this? What does, but that was the talk. And basically all of the African Americans have that talk, just like having the talk when the police pull you over or before the police. But yeah, so I've dealt with it all my life, and there's so many examples. It's affected my life, my career, everything. And so, but I was impressed that Jen was interested, even though she didn't have a story.
It reminds me of Ayana. You still see you're there, and we had a conversation because we one of the jams we had racism as one of the topics, and Ayani was leading the jam. But before we were talking, we were kind of, you know, talking about you know, how to kind of have a conversation about that, because you know, if you don't have those stories, because you're not raised well, it's really difficult to have that conversation, or just I felt that we were almost worried about having the conversation. But anyway, I know you told me one of the stories that because I said I had to explain to my daughter, my son, you know, what's happening with the riots in the U.S. and you know, the killing of Black people by the police, and then Ayani said, well, because I said, well, that's a really difficult story to tell, and then Ayani, you said, well, that's difficult, but when you are when you're an African American in the US, you have to, for instance, the story of if you're pulled over by the police, have your hands on the wheel and do all these things. And I was like, all right, yeah, yes, well, that's even, yeah, okay, I can't even relate to that. That's very difficult for me to have that conversation with your children. So that's one thing in general. So maybe Ayani, maybe you want to share something about that because I pointed you out.
I was talking away and I still was muted.
Sorry.
I forgot I would have added to that, Marc, of make sure you have you start recording the interaction as well, either with video or audio. California lets you record without permission of the other parties. So that's a really good thing. But unfortunately, we live in a time and we live in the US, and again, Jen, you're in South Africa, so I think there are many parallels that can be drawn between the US and South Africa. But you know, the whole idea of apartheid and based on race, and this whole system that's been developed simply because of race, you know, to oppress certain members of a certain race. And to me, race is a construct, obviously, because it is about power, it is about greed, it is about money. Yeah, it's a really hard conversation to have. And for the allies, for you allies out there, Arne, I would just say, for me, it's just to say, you know, there's no way of explaining to your daughter and son, you know, the depth of what's going on in our country. There's just no way you can, in our countries, because South Africa also had this. But what's going on is just to say, it's just to find the humanity and just know that, you know, treat people the way you want to be treated. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And never say to a person of color, I don't see your color. Never say that.
Yeah.
Never say that.
That is true.
Thank you.
That's
Share with us.
That's an
Share with
important-
us your story.
I don't want to jump in. I don't know how I think I raised my hand, or I tried to anyway.
Go ahead, Sherry.
I don't want to oversimplify the complexity of what we're talking about or the sensitivity, but the whole question of what's the one thread you can pull on that ties all of this together, everything that we're talking about. I didn't grow up in a world in my mid-50s. I did not grow up in a world that taught me that your pain is my pain, your struggle is my struggle, you are me, I am you. I didn't grow up like that. I grew up bullied. I grew up getting beat up. I grew up in a world where I was told I'm 4'11", and I remember being in 4th grade when you had to pick your instrument, and I wanted to play the drums. Like more than anything, I wanted to play the drums. And my band teacher told me, girls don't play the drums. Girls play the flute. And so my book title would be Girls Don't Play the Drum, right? So asked me what I played, the flute. Then I played the piccolo, and now I'm a 4'11" little girl playing a piccolo, and aren't you cute? You know, so this is like, so for me, when I just think about what we're talking about and the thread that you pull on that not fixes, but that heals everything we're talking about, it's to recognize Dana and Mimp and Yunyen and all of you are me, and I am you. And you having to put your hands on the wheel affects me, even if I've never done it before, that any oppression is my oppression, and that everything that happens matters. And again, this is the thread that as I move through the world now as a 50-year-old plus woman, a mother, and I am literally consciously retooling my brain to understand that a straw in the ocean, in the Indian Ocean, matters as much to me as somebody polluting the Great Lakes of Michigan where I live. That, you know, if anything, I'm now living in a world of interconnectivity and interdependence, and I'm having to teach myself that and teach my son that as well. So that for me is the thread. I am you. There's nothing you've experienced I haven't experienced on some level at some time, right? I don't live in a world that saw me. I was a female. I'm white. I'm young. I have a Middle Eastern name. People make certain assumptions about those of us in the Middle East, as you all know. So I don't know that anybody lived in a world where they didn't have some bias. And I just think that if I were to pull on that one thread, it would be the thread of we are all one, and this is one planet. And I know it's cliche, but I think when we start really living that and we start understanding it, this world will change. That's my one thread. And that's the gift that I have in the world I live in now, the thinking that's changed me. So I thank you all for sharing this in your stories. And, you know, I'm here because I'm connected to a global community that matters to me. But that wasn't how I was raised.
Thanks,
A whole
Sherry.
new mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Anybody
And,
else? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just really quick. I was just sharing in my group with me and Sarah teaching at a design school in San Francisco. We're surrounded by 19 to 25-year-olds, depending on if we're teaching grad or undergrad. I can only imagine what the workforce is going to look like in the next 10 years when these young people who are marching in the streets for climate, who are protesting, who are rallying around these passions that they're just now discovering as young people, because it's happening right now. They're living in this, we're all living in this, but them specifically, they're living in this very, very particular moment in history. And I can only imagine what the workforce is going to look like in 10 years when they become junior, mid-level people demanding their employers, demanding the companies they work for to do better. So I think we're in this really interesting time right now. Now, whether or not we'll have an inhabitable planet to live on in 10 years, who knows? but yeah, so I'm hopeful and optimistic about this what's going on right now and the effects it's going to have with the younger people. So that Sherry, someone who's 10 years old who's in music class won't be told that by their teacher, because that wouldn't even come to them to even say that to a young girl. So,
Marc, want to also point out that I'm old enough to have gone through the Vietnam era, marching in the streets and all of that. And I think what we missed at that time and what's different now is if we focus on the basic values and we get clear on those, so those carry us through a much longer way. It's not just the change. It's not just that we need to march. It's not just that they need to do this or that. It's the whole basic value pieces we need to get clearer on, so that as you age, or these people age, that those values are clearer to them and that they do feel guilty or motivated, or whichever way you want to take that.
Right. And Sarah and I, we've seen studies that say that if companies don't have some sort of social mission baked into their DNA, if they're not trying to do any sort of social good in whatever it is that they do, product, service, whatever, they're gonna have a hard time attracting millennials as employees down the road. So I'm excited. I think we are in this very interesting moment in time. And just really quick before I'm going to shut up after this, Steve posted, I want to make sure you all saw this. Steve posted a link to a raindrop with bookmarks of examples that were shared in the doc, as well as other examples, and keep that bookmark link because we're adding more examples of what we're talking about now in this call. We're adding more to it. So save that in your browser. Come back to it every so often. But me and Sarah are going to continue to add examples of employees and people taking a stand and demanding their companies to do better, or industries.
Anna, you had something to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, and by the way, I teach at the School of Design at San Francisco State University. So We're all here, yeah. And I am, and I am fine. What I was just wanted to say was that just as when, and David, you and I are in the same group, we're baby boomers, and just as the revolution was televised when he and I were growing up, when David and I were growing up, the revolution was televised. Every night at dinner hour, we saw the civil rights marchers being mowed down by fire hoses and attacked by dogs on the 6 o'clock evening news. And right now, this revolution is being televised as well, because now we saw George Floyd being killed. We're constantly, you know, in this news cycle, whether it be social media, well, primarily outside of the mainstream news, where all these things are happening and being broadcast. And so this group, like you said, Marc, the millennials, they are heightened. Their awareness is so heightened that they cannot help but pay attention. That's my 2 points, my 2 cents.
Yeah, I want to amplify what you said. It's not being broadcast on the mainstream news channels and on TV, but it is absolutely being broadcast on Twitter, on live streams, on Twitch. So you know, if you're not in one of the groups that is being directly affected by at least the police brutality problem, or you know, you don't see it in your neighborhoods, I would highly recommend getting on Twitter and following some people who are covering this information, maybe in your city. If you're like me and you're hanging out in a small city during the pandemic. I follow a lot of the independent reporters in Portland. It's really interesting, in Seattle, in Marc's hometown, in West Virginia, in Richmond, in Philly. You know, it's pretty easy to find some of these independent reporters. One of the women who was reporting the Mount Rushmore protests on the 4th of July, 3rd of July, the indigenous people there who were protesting. It's really hard to turn on the news and they're talking about, you know, home haircuts or something silly. And then, you know, you turn on your computer and people are out on the streets all over the country and it's not on TV, you know. Once it stopped being violent, once the police stopped causing riots, the news stopped covering it, but it's still happening. It's still being broadcast on live independent streams. Someone wants me to share the Twitter profiles. I'll have to go look them up. I'll add them to the raindrop. So follow that raindrop.
We've got a few more minutes. Does anybody else in our audience have a passion to share or an observation? Really would love to hear from anybody who's, you know, outside of the US and Europe as well.
Zemena,
yeah.
For Arlen, no, I'm joking. No, I mean, my observation is that it's interesting that how some topics, because they happen in the US or Europe, it seems that it matters more to everybody, right? As like when the church, Notre Dame got burned, right? Everybody was just saying like, oh, this is happening with France, and we're just like getting together. But then like the world is not only Europe or the US. Like what are we doing to talk about what is happening and also in other regions or countries or cities? So that should also be something that we could ask ourselves every day and just, bring it up, right? Because why in this case of the refugees, whether they are, it becomes like a second thing again, right? Or we accept that it's just normal. And there are things that have been happening for a while, but sometimes when do we become blind about those? Or when do we think that it's somebody else's only responsibility rather than just bring it up? So that's more like my observation. But then again,
I agree. I mean, I was thinking you had a big earthquake in Mexico a couple of years ago, but the Notre Dame Cathedral probably got more notice worldwide than that earthquake.
Probably. I don't know. I mean, I was there being goods and taking them to the places. So, but it was, yes, it's terrible.
Anupa, did you? Oh, I'm sorry, Zanina.
Sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that, like, in the breakout room, we were talking about just like chance and choice, that, you know, we're all equals, and in whatever stage that we are in life, we need that opportunity or that that chance to just take ourselves forward. So, you know, in terms of like Donna, she said that she was, I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, she's talking about the work that she does with a lot of children who are in between, you know, going to, you know, let's say a juvenile institution, or, you know, talking to them about their problems and, you know, what they need. And I was talking about my own personal journey, that, you know, since I was dyslexic, I wanted to help people who need that chance to move forward. So I started working with, let's say, handloom artisans who come from extremely grassroots levels. So, you know, everybody has that skill, that opportunity, that kind of, you know, that initiative within them, that, you know, we as, you know, designers or whoever we are in another field, we should, you know, take people forward. So I think that's something that during the pandemic, we can help each other, you know, wherever we are, you know, just taking that, you know, initiative forward, whether it's for climate, whether it's for like empowerment, whether it's for anything. I think it's important that we take that choice forward for somebody else who can't.
Thank you, Anupa. You've got, looks like you have some other dyslexics here too.
Yeah, here, me, yes.
Oh, good to see.
We have a team member on our US Design Thinkers team who's dyslexic, and we have to kind of interpret things that she writes, but it's all part of our process, right? We've changed our process to make sure that anything she does, we appreciate the spirit of what she's saying, and we know how to translate it. David is laughing because he knows
Emma.
it.
Oh, you're talking about Emma?
Yeah.
But she has a PhD, so there you go. Dyslexia is my superpower, by the way.
I'm so happy to hear that now.
Yeah, my daughter just the other week got diagnosed with dyslexia, and I was like, "Welcome to the family." That's us. So it's a superpower. We have a new topic for a Wednesday web jam, which is dyslexia. Totally. I'm like, yes, of course. I mean, that's my life.
Yes, thank you. Finally.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me put that on the list, Arne, especially.
Yeah, I just did it's not online yet. I just did an interview for my podcast, and during the conversation, we discovered that the person I was interviewing had a dyslexia, and it's you go through life very similar in many ways because you're wired differently, as we are all wired differently, but it has a specific kind of thing that you have to kind of find your way. And you know, you're not in the mainstream, you have to find your own stream, and it is a creative superpower. So anyway,
Guys,
think we are
at 12:30 or here at the half hour.
Now it's getting interesting.
I know. Well, I was going to say, I don't know,
racism is interesting, but dyslexia, now we are talking.
I don't mind. I have to
how about combining racism, dyslexia, and women rights? And ADHD.
There you go.
Arna, I just want to say goodbye and thank you to Marc and Sarah and all of you, but you're welcome to stay. Yu Yen has the controls, so I can leave.
No.
And one last thing before we all jump off. Yeah, definitely come next week. As designers, Sarah and I are makers, right? So today we talked very, high level, cushy stuff, right? The feel good stuff, whatever. And then next week it's like, okay, how do we apply it? Let's get to work. How do we actually incorporate this stuff into the work that we do? So next week will be very, very tactical and practical. So looking forward to continuing the conversation. And again, thanks for the Design Thinkers group to reach out to invite us. And we had a blast putting this presentation together, and to be continued.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone. See you next week.
So much.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Bye.